Good morning, everyone. I'm Paul. I'm the youth pastor at St. Francis Church.
Hi, I'm Rosie and I am part of Hope Church and the youth group here. I have just finished school and in October I will be starting a gap year at the Source Fiver Church in Watford.
And a random fact about me is that I got a haircut today for the first time in about 4 months. Anyone else? Let me know on the comment section on YouTube. Also, let me know what you think.
And a random fact about me is that I'm half Italian.
Where do you find peace? Is there a place you go to retreat, to be restored, to be made whole again? Perhaps instead of a place, it's a person or a group of people that fill your soul with joy and refresh you. For me, a good movie can have that effect, or a meal with friends, or a good book. What about you? Where do you find peace? Well, friends, it's been a strange time, hasn't it? Many of us have had to work a lot harder in more difficult conditions and without many of the simple pleasures that we would enjoy and that would create these environments and these spaces of peace. To our key and essential workers, we just want to honour you and thank you for the various and costly ways that you have served us throughout lockdown. Each of us have a story from isolation. COVID-19 has changed all of our lives. We have experienced isolation, being separated from loved ones. We've experienced loss of freedoms, of jobs, of joys, of life. Invading each day is the hidden enemy of coronavirus. We have never known when or how or who it might strike. In the midst of this anxious time, we've had to adapt and discover new spaces of finding peace. The Bible word for peace is shalom. It's this sense of wholeness, completeness, fullness. It's about our well-being. It's about the good life. It's about being fulfilled under God's rule and working in harmony with one another and our surroundings. It's the state that God intended for us. How can we experience this peace in a time of heightened anxiety? And I say heightened because even before COVID-19, we were known for being anxious in this country. It was perhaps the pandemic before COVID. Our pace, our disconnection, our relationship to technology and to one another had created an environment in this country where we experience unease and unrest daily. How can we be free from anxiety and live in peace? This is a question Paul is qualified to answer in Philippians. He is writing from prison. He doesn't know what is in store for him, but even in prison, we learnt last week that Jesus was enough for Paul, that everything else is, to use a word that Danny used, poo, compared to the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus as Lord. Thank you, Danny, for teaching us the Greek word for poo last week. I'm very grateful for that. In today's chapter 4, we discover that with knowing Jesus comes this sense of peace and contentment. Here is Rosie sharing some more.
Peace, not anxiety. What does this look like in our lives? In Philippians chapter 4, verse 6, Paul says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, through prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God." Now, he's not saying we can never be anxious, because we are human and we are all going to worry every day and for the rest of our lives. But he wants to change the mindset around anxiety. He's saying to change our worries into prayers. God has already achieved peace, and we are invited to experience this. It's not something that we need to earn. Whether we are in a good or bad situation, fix your mind on God, who works good in everything. I loved it described as God being our deep peace in the middle of life's problems and storms. The bit that really stood out to me is where it says, in every situation. I think so often we think that we can only go to God in moments of desperation. But if it matters to you, it matters to God. It might be you need to ask God for peace in anxious situations multiple times a day. Whether that's you're worried about seeing someone, you're worried about going to the shop, or you're worried about an issue at work. The more we do it, the more our relationship with God strengthens and grows. I have seen this in my own life. I am naturally a very, very anxious person, and I worry about every little thing throughout the day. And I've learned to just give this to God and turn those anxieties into prayer. And so it might be I'm driving to a certain situation and I'm just really anxious, and I just spend that time in prayer. And it just really helps me during those times. And as I started to trust God with the little things and saw his provision in those situations, it enabled me to trust him in the big. I couldn't have stepped out in faith in as many situations as I have if it hadn't been to learn to cast my anxieties on him. Next year I'm doing a church leadership course in Watford, which feels so out of my depth, but I have learned to walk with God every step of the way instead of doing things in my own strength, and knowing that he will be there to lean on in every challenge that might come up has enabled me to go on this journey, which I might not have otherwise. I'm still learning to turn to God in moments of anxiety, and I think it will be a lifelong journey trying to get better at this, because I think it is just natural to want to take everything on ourselves and try and fix it, but only God can. And just trusting God with the outcome. During a time like this, a world pandemic, I'm sure a lot of us have turned to God when things are just feeling so uncertain and we just can't feel peace because we don't know what's around the corner. But it doesn't just take a world pandemic to do this. We need to learn, as things to go into the new normal, to just trust God with everything instead of letting anxiety consume us. It is also so important to do this with thanksgiving, because I know my prayers can often start to look like a shopping list, where I go, I want this and this, and I need this. But instead, we need to change our mindset from looking at what we want God to do to what God has already done for us. This can be done through maybe keeping a prayer journal and looking at all the ways God has answered your prayers throughout the years. So we remember to be thankful instead of constantly looking ahead for the next thing. We can also see so many examples of God's provision in the Bible. Peace can also be found by filling our minds with the goodness of God and just simply getting to know him and spending time with him, whether that's in worship or reading the Bible or prayer. In Philippians chapter 4 verse 8, Paul explains how whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such thing. Spending time filling our minds with the goodness of God helps us feel the peace of God, which also can mean contentment, fulfillment, and wholeness. When asked where the peace of God comes from, I love it explained as the God of peace. Get to know one and you'll have the other. I wonder what our lives would look like if we experienced the peace of God in every situation. Now this might seem unachievable, but we can journey together with God, taking little steps at a time and forming the habit of prayer and thanksgiving to make this a reality.
Thank you, Rosie. So how can we be free from fear and from anxiety and live in peace in a time that is known for being one full of anxiety? Rosie has helpfully pointed us to a number of valuable truths in today's passage. Firstly, she pointed to the practice of gratitude, turning our anxieties to prayer. Secondly, we can do this with thanksgiving. This practice shifts our minds away from our current worries and helps us to focus on what God has already done for us. And finally, she pointed us to the discipline of filling our minds with the goodness of God. I love what she said. She said, spending our time filling our minds with the goodness of God helps us to know the peace of God. There's today's tweet. All of these ideas I want to suggest are grounded in verse 4 and 5. It says this, rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. The Lord is near. This is about us submitting ourselves to the Lordship of Jesus, to make him the authority in our life. Walter Brueggemann defines this process of becoming a Christian as an invitation to reimagine our lives, an invitation and summons to switch stories and therefore to change lives. Paul's invitation to live a life of rejoicing and peace is not an invitation to try harder, as if in some way he wants us to apply these principles as self-help, 3 steps to being free from anxiety. It's not this. Instead, it's an invitation to live in a new story, in a new reality, to reimagine our lives as one not defined by anxiety and fear, but one under the rule of Jesus, who says, peace be with you. It is by belonging in Jesus' story, abiding with him, and learning to live as he lived, that we experience a life of deep peace, even in the midst of the storms of life.